everyone, and welcome to MintCasts, our MintPress podcast series. I'm Mnar Muhawesh, editor-in-chief of MintPress, and I will be your host. Joining me today is Alex Fidel, a 22-year-old independent media entrepreneur and host of Free Thought Media, a news program which he founded in 2010 while he was in college. He is currently running for mayor in Encinitas, California as the Liberty candidate with a platform focused on peace, liberty, freedom, and equality for everyone. His goals include initiatives such as banning GMO crops, ending corporatism, getting money out of politics, electoral reform, protecting medical cannabis patients' rights, and putting an end to police militarization and the police state. He recently hit the media spotlight when he exposed the idiocy and hypocrisy of the two-party system on live television. With his acute honesty and refreshing take on American electoral process, could he be the future of American politics? Thank you, Alex, for joining me today. In a time when our youth has been described as apathetic to politics, which I actually just talked about in a previous podcast with a younger person who is getting involved in politics, what made you decide to get into politics at such a young age? Was there a particular moment where you realized that you wanted to run for mayor? When was that, and what happened?
So there's a bit of a gap between getting involved in politics and then running for mayor. I started out like really kind of just seeing what was going on in the world, especially when the 2008 presidential election was happening. I really didn't know much, but at the same time I was just blurting stuff out just to have an opinion on something. And the kind of spineless view of like, I consider myself an independent, but there's the type of independent that's either confused or spineless or really just mixes a hodgepodge of ideas without knowing what it means. So I was trying to, be like, well, the Republicans are right that there's too much regulation, but the Democrats are right because there's not enough regulation. I really didn't know the depth and depravity of the pyramid scheme system that we live in under today, which is those statements are just superficial in comparison to what we're dealing with right now. So I decided I am not going to, talk out of my rear end anymore. I'm going to try to actually find out what was going on in the world, and because I was really getting distasted by politics and just how divisive it was, and a lot of my family members or ancestors lived behind the Iron Curtain and stuff like that. So just in secret police, and saw that notion of top-down society, where kind of elites benefit at the expense of everybody else, and your life isn't important, but theirs are. So I was reading 1984 in high school. Then I picked up End the Fed and the Revolution by Dr. Ron Paul. But I also read things like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. We read the first chapter in high school, and I wish we had read more of that. But we have our top-down corporate state-dictated educational curriculum standards. Which even the most liberal, and there were I appreciate the good teachers I had as individuals, but it's really an overarching systemic problem of even the most liberal people still glorify imperialism and capitalism and all these other kinds of things. So my best education came when I left high school, and I became a journalist. Right off the bat, first semester of college, they let rookies in on the air. So fortunately, and by then I was like, I was a little bit more awakened, because when you start out, and I originally started out more on the libertarian side, but now I kind of like I think I have a really good synthesis between the true libertarian, not the Rand Paul, pro-Israel type, and then the true radical left, and not the Elizabeth Warren pro-Israel type. So.
It's somewhere in the middle where most Americans would find themselves.
Yeah, kind of like radical centrism, which I feel is about unity, positivity, looking for the good in people, working together, regardless. I hate to split hairs, because you can only split a hair so much before it gets microscopic, and then you're just wasting your time. So I decided to get involved in journalism to learn more about. It was less of like, I'm George Stephanopoulos and I want to be a star in the media or this big name. I wanted it to be integrated into my life and learn a lot about the world, and be able to go against both the phony lefties and on MSNBC and the crazy kooks on the Fox side of things, and even if I was just reaching one person at a time, because I think that everyone counts. So I started my radio show. One of the first people I interviewed was Governor Gary Johnson, and then I just started interviewing like all these really cool people, and I was just learning a lot, and also seeing Obama continuing the wars, Nancy Pelosi saying the Patriot Act was bad under Bush, but spearheading its renewal when President Obama was in office. All this stuff kind of like, even though I was already kind of awakening, everything that I was experiencing was shifting my eyeglass even more to realize that the whole system is a charade. And then got involved in Governor Gary Johnson's presidential campaign. Then his exclusions from the Republican Party debates opened my eyes even more to the mainstream media control and how they actually are making decisions at the editorial level to what we hear or not hear. So they treat us like, you know, children and think that we only deserve what they think is right for us to hear. And that made my job as a journalist even more important than discovering people like Luke Rukowski and Abby Martin. I used to think I was just an opinion radio host guy, but then I realized that I was reporting on things that these paid people on CBS and NBC weren't even reporting, and they were paid for a reason to not report on that. So it just made my position in life that much more interesting, and learning constantly from these experiences. And then in 2012, I interviewed Rick Simpson, who produces cannabis oil to cure people's cancers in Canada. Mm-hmm. And just from that very notion that people would rather make a profit than see people not suffer from cancer, or at least have the freedom to try something that might work, because cannabis may not work for everyone, but nothing ever works for everyone because everyone's different. Chemo, same thing. So that really shifted my eyeglass to that there are people who are sick enough to keep cures for cancer illegal. And when I asked him, what he thinks of President Obama, he said straight up that he thinks President Obama, he said that President Obama was a Bilderberger and an Illuminati. And I heard about the second term, but I thought he was talking about Burger King when he was talking about the first one. So that led me down the road of discovering, how these bankers collude together to perpetuate these policies of perpetual war and poverty. And then also the whole thing with the Commission on Presidential Debates really stood out for me. And I interviewed a friend of ours, Christina Tobin of Free and Equal, in January of 2013. After this kind of like all these experiences, kind of like I took a second to really glance at them in hindsight and just have to see how corrupt the system. She informed me that the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds helped to fund the Commission on Presidential Debates. So I figured that federal level, really corrupt. We should still try to tackle them because they are the ones that send bombs and stuff like that to kill people overseas. And as much as I support agorism and anarchism and divestment, there's still a big tax base of, like you mentioned, apathetic people who will still send their tax dollars. And the Pentagon doesn't care how anarchist I am. They're still going to send the bombs to Iraq. They're still going to send bombs to Israel.
So it sounds like if we sum up everything that you really are passionate about, it comes down to one word, which is corporatocracy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which controls the U.S. government, basically makes up our policies. One of the issues that you are really interested in and passionate about is reforming, or basically getting rid of, the police state. How have you seen that manifest itself in the city of Encinitas?
So after being involved with the kind of more presidential level, I decided to shift to the local level because I knew that Sacramento was corrupt to the nines. So I figured City Hall is right down the street. I should try to get involved. We had this medical cannabis initiative that is on the ballot. It had qualified for the ballot prior to the 2012 election, but for the 2014 general election. But watching documentaries about how little kids have epilepsy, and any one of the next seizures could be fatal. I mean, politicians are letting people's parents gamble with their own children's lives. Actually, someone that was pleading with Governor Chris Christie lost their child in the process of debating such a corrupt, gluttonous person. So I decided to respectfully, especially since some incumbents had gotten replaced on the city council with new faces, to respectfully not present the cannabis argument from the point of a high times stoner argument, but from a medical compassion, rational policy side, just to test the waters and see how open they were. Nothing, not a response. I sent them emails, then I followed up with phone calls. The only person to answer my phone call was Councilmember Tony Kranz, who is now the Democratic opponent in this mayoral race. Mm-hmm. He yelled at me, told me that this issue is not important. I should, basically without even saying it, sit down and shut up. We're not going to take up this issue. You should focus on the federal level, which I just explained. Right. Is a dead end. And I told him, I went to bat for Gary Johnson, and it's really controlled by the corporatocracy from the top down. You at the local level are the most accountable. But basically, he told me, I'm just a 22-year-old punk, without saying it, of course, but, very condescending, and that kind of motivated me more to look at this proposition that passed in 2012 for the city of Encinitas. Mayor's position used to be appointed. Now, this year is the first ever election for it, and there was an incident shortly thereafter in 2013. This was after the Chris Dorner thing, before the Boston bombing. So I'm sure you may have heard of the story where in Northern California or something like that, parents wanted to teach their kid a lesson, so the kid took out the pickup truck one day, just do regular stuff outside the house. They called the cops and lied that they said he sold the pickup truck. They wound up with a dead child at the end of it. And I don't blame the parents. I blame the police officers for jumping at the chance on some action. So here in Encinitas, it's a suburban beach town. Not much happens for police officers aside from revenue generation with drug busts and traffic speeding tickets. So person that I don't want to get into his name or his details, because I actually know I want to it kind of likes going to high school here, but we'll just talk about the situation generically. He took a car out. Same situation happened. Drug problems, psychological problems. Haven't had any luck helping him through his ailments. Thought that maybe if the police, can get him, they can forcibly check him into rehab to sort out the issues. His car was reported stolen. Cops, yes, car thievery, finally in this, boring town. They were most likely were acting pretty aggressive, and someone in a fragile mental state is probably not going to respond very well to aggressive, typical police behavior. They alleged that since he was difficult to detain, they threw smoke grenades to be able to capture him and detain him. That's when they claimed that they were fired upon non-fatally below the waist. And if this guy was such a cold-blooded killer, he would, he has the advantage to end their lives right then and there. Being in a fragile mental state, if he did allegedly do what they say, maybe it was just reactionary. If he even had a gun, you could ask all kinds of questions. That's left up to a truly independent investigation. So I'll just stick with what the official story alleges. And I as a journalist, I use the word allegedly a lot. He ran away, hid in his mom's house. Instead of bringing out the psychological emergency response team, which they, given all the NSA stuff and the ability to pull up the medical records probably of anyone that you pull over, they could have found out that he has problems and called the PERT. They didn't. They brought out the police state. They brought out an armored vehicle. They brought out endless amounts of cops with, big gear, tear gas launchers, AR-15s, blocking off the street, kicking people out of their homes that live next to it, kind of like what happened in the Boston bombing. Right. There's a video online of just the armored vehicle making laps around like this one median section. Just why? Like, he's hidden it at his home, probably using up the gas card or the diesel card or whatever that, like it puts Hummers to shame as far as much pollution it puts out. Because if you use up your money, your budget, you get a bigger budget next year. That's the whole tactic. They eventually parked the armored vehicle outside the house, and they eventually entered the house, and what they found was an apparent suicide. And if you're in a fragile mental state, a small army and an armored vehicle is not going to help any situation at all. If he may have had suicidal tendencies beforehand, I don't want to judge, or say like, this is what definitely, but it exacerbated probably anything he had beforehand. Then after that Boston bombing happened, and it's seeing the same thing, people getting kicked out of their homes. And we could, actually, we can go into the whole official story thing about Boston bombing. Storm Clouds Gathering has an amazing video called Boston Bombing, What You're Not Being Told, if anybody wants to watch that. But after that, I just wrote up a speech on the police state, went to city council to speak on the off-agenda item stuff. I filled out my white slip, passed it to the city clerk. Then I picked up on the agenda, and the agenda had an item, an additional $25,000 worth of grant monies from the Department of Homeland Security.
Wow.
But it was too late for me to fill out the pink slip to speak on it as an on-agenda item, which would have pulled it separately, but they lumped it into the consent calendar with the important things like the minutes, and they voted unanimously to approve $25,000 in Homeland Security grants. So at that point, I realized that I had to run for mayor of this town. Not so much that we should ever rely on one person for change, but to, if let's say I didn't know it was on the agenda beforehand, there should be automatically like 200 to 300 people, like in Concord, New Hampshire, when they force the city council to say no to the Bearcat for every time there's an important issue. But like you mentioned, apathy, even people who are awakened, it's like they don't know what to do. So I hope to, whether I get elected or not, these battles in city council are going to take place whether I'm in the mayor's seat or not. And they're going to take place with or without 100 people on the council. And if there's no people, flooding the city council hallways, screaming for their rights and not stopping until things change, whether I'm in that seat or not, things won't change if it's empty and there's crickets and I'm just yelling at a bunch of corrupt, crooked politicians.
And, Alex, throughout history, it sometimes does only take one person to make a really big change, so don't lose your hopes. But speaking of medical problems, protecting medical cannabis patients' rights is part of your platform, and there's also an ordinance regarding medical cannabis on the ballot in the upcoming election in Encinitas. What do you think needs to be done to protect medical marijuana patients in Encinitas and in other states where it is legal? And I know that you touched on it a little bit before, but I want you to expand on that.
Sure. So we have Proposition F, which would allow medical cannabis, medical cooperatives, holistic cooperatives in the city of Encinitas, that would basically force the town to respect Prop 215 and SB 420. Which they are currently not respecting. They essentially have a de facto ban and cronies within the planning department that don't issue licenses to medical cannabis dispensaries. This would prevent that and provide for regulations that address the community's needs, like no blatant advertising. It would be about the medicine and medical cooperative, layout, and not about, advertising, girls in bikinis with pot leaves on them. And which is funny because there are some people that support full legalization but not this initiative, which is weird because then you'll have girls in bikinis with pot leaves on them out in the windows, advertising cannabis as a non-medicine. And I support. I'm against the sexism in the marijuana industry, but at the same time I support freedom and complete full legalization of cannabis and hemp. But on the issue of medicine, I think the best way to protect patients' rights is to allow them their fundamental human right to have safe and local access to it. Just like we have safe and local access to our big pharma guinea pig centers, otherwise known as CVSs or other pharmaceutical dispensers. I personally am a very holistic person. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I don't even use Advil. I try to avoid GMOs and fluoride and all this kind of stuff at all costs. So to say that, if you have something, you should just go take an Advil, that destroys my liver. But cannabinoids actually help to heal our organs and heal our brain cells. And I would prefer to use that for my ailments as a patient. But I'm able-bodied, as you can tell. I'm not paralyzed. I'm not wheelchair-bound. I can walk on my two legs. Patients who are wheelchair-bound should not have to take multiple, and especially once we're low income, should not have to take 8 to 10 different public transportation modes just to get to the only medical cannabis dispensary that's in the boonies somewhere in San Diego. And even then, it's like our district attorney, Bonnie DeMonis, colludes with the federal government. So our local officers who are not paid by the federal government, they're not employed title-wise by the federal government. They just get cross-deputized one day, and then the next day they're a DEA agent temporarily, and they get to go and raid people. So they don't even have the protection of local government. So instead of focusing on the patients and their health, they're focusing on, am I going to get raided tomorrow? And that raises costs, that diminishes care for patients, and they are meant to be caregivers, not, they're not supposed to be like glorified drug dealers, which they aren't, but they're living the life of it, being, scared of the SWAT team every day. So by having local access where the local police officers can arrest DEA agents for violating, legally existing medical cannabis dispensaries, so the caregivers can finally have a breath of fresh air, take care of their patients, and even then go beyond cannabis to all its other holistic ways of treating people. Because I believe allopathic medicine should be the final resort. Allopathic medicine was brought about in the military during the Civil War, which is one is surgery, which is necessary if your brains are gushing out of your head. But and it's also trying to poison the sickness out of you, like feeding you lead and mercury and all these kinds of things to try to poison the sickness out of you, which we know doesn't work. Rather than eating good food and stuff like that to build up your body's natural defenses and stuff like that, and staying away from chemicals and other toxins. But now our world has shifted where we're so polluted that even if things that are falling out of the sky are polluted, our food is polluted. We're forced to take all these pharmaceutical chemicals, which are part of the whole allopathic method rather than the naturopathic method, which would help people get rid of their cancers. And cannabis actually scientifically causes cancer cells to commit what is known as autophagy, which is self-eating, so that causes cancer cells to commit suicide. Cannabis may not work for everyone, but people should at least have the freedom, especially when they're let go by the medical system, to go and die. And that's the Rick Simpson documentary, Run from the Cure, on YouTube. Most of the people he cured, cancer-free, had been let go by the medical system and been left to die. So the best way to protect the patient's rights is to allow them to have that local access, because it is a human right. Really, people's objection to this is the whole busybody mentality. Oh, it's my neighborhood. I get to decide I don't like this or I don't like that. It's like dictating their personal taste upon people who were born with epilepsy and don't have that choice to, I don't care what the beautification of our neighborhood. When a child is dying of epilepsy, their parents have a right to allow their kids to live.
And this is really because of reefer madness, obviously, and the propaganda behind that. It kind of reminds me of a recent incident that happened here in Minnesota. Interesting things do happen here in Minnesota once in a while. And this mother was actually arrested for giving her, I think he was like a 9 or 10-year-old son, cannabis oil after he was had a really severe brain injury and had to have surgery for it. And she was arrested for child abuse because the medical marijuana bill hadn't been passed yet. It's going to be passing in a couple months. And so it just reminds me of that, and it's so unfortunate. She obviously was trying to do her son a favor, like you were talking about, but that right was taken away from her. And that police officer who arrested her probably was legally able to drink that night, and that's obviously more toxic to your body, but that's legal and that's okay.
People are actually objecting. They're saying that the distance from schools is too close. But I used to go to high school here in Encinitas, and there was a liquor store and a Carl's Jr. pretty close to the school. People would walk to the Carl's Jr. and then in the entire plaza there was at least 2 or 3 liquor stores, including a couple grocery stores that carried liquor. And as far as Carl's Jr. is concerned, Professor Griff of Public Enemy said that fast food is not food, it's non-food, it's drugs masquerading as food. So it's all a bunch of pharmaceutical chemicals hidden inside mystery meat. So people are more okay with fast food and liquor than they are with a natural healing plant that comes from our Creator, our nature, whatever people want to that aligns with our human endocannabinoid system, which is just like any other system we have in our body. And some say oftentimes cancers come up at a rising out of a cannabinoid deficiency within our body, because there's the whole thing. The acidic diet versus alkaline diet. If your body has your pH, and by eating fast food and all this nasty stuff, you get a really acidic body pH. But if you eat good food and exercise and stuff like that, and stay away from chemicals and pharmaceuticals, your body is more alkaline, and therefore builds up your natural ability to fight cancers and other sicknesses. And I used to eat like crap. I used to eat ice cream sundae, Pop-Tarts for breakfast, and ever since I went 180, I don't get sick anymore. And if I do get sick, I don't get that sick. I used to get sick, and I used to get violently sick. Like if I ever got like a cold, I would get fevers for a couple of days, and it would be gnarly. So I highly recommend the Food Revolution. That's catching on.
I just want to note that you said gnarly, and you told me all this while I'm drinking my iced coffee.
No worry, coffee isn't bad. It's mostly like
I know what
sodas and McDonald's.
Right. So let's move on to another subject quickly, because you are very active in Free and Equal, the nonprofit organization that advocates for electoral reform, and it really you guys bring a lot of attention to this illusion of the two-party system, which divides America. More people are waking up to this and understanding that there really is no difference between Republican and Democrat. At the core, they're pretty much the same. How do you plan on reforming the electoral system on a local level, and why do you think real change starts on a local level? And you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but I really want you to talk more about that.
Well, I actually kind of ran because I predicted that it would be between the lesser of two evils. There's the Republican lady who actually snapped a photo with the chair of the San Diego GOP, whose Twitter profile picture is like a "We Stand with Israel" graphic. He doesn't like me because in 2011 I attended their fancy-ass, sorry for my language.
No, that's okay. You can
their country club meetings. They have monthly meetings at a country club. If there's anything like we don't care about the common man, like we're stereotypes, have a meeting at a country club. I went there with Gary Johnson and Ron Paul literature, and really got in a lot of people's faces because I'm all about. I don't want to preach to the choir. I want to talk to everyday people, challenge people's worldviews in a positive way. But you know, you have to be firm. Like the media of the day try to say that Malcolm X was angry, but he really said, "I'm about love." It's just they don't like to hear the truth. The truth, you know, hurts their ears. So it's kind of the same thing. I'm always trying to be open to people with open hearts. But if they have closed hearts, they're going to get offended. They're going to think that I'm angry when really I'm just saying facts. You know, the facts are the facts. And he doesn't like me personally because I switched over to support Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party, and I was pretty much like very, very active within San Diego County on a grassroots level, just guerrilla marketing, like going door to door, yard signs everywhere in the streets, public areas for Gary Johnson. And so I was too much of a libertarian purist then, but now that I'm like, you know, hanging out with Cindy Sheehan and like, you know, supporting unity between all different peoples of all walks of life. Now I'm not a libertarian anymore. I'm a radical leftist communist. So I can't ever please them. But it's he snapped a picture with her because if I wasn't in the race, it would just be a passive endorsement because, you know, when it's the lesser of two evils, it doesn't really matter who wins. The same policies get put forth. Now that I'm a threat in the race, you know, snapping a photo, supporting this other guy that's running for city council, that's a Tea Party, Sarah Palin loving, you know, basically a cop. He's not an actual cop, but he's a bureaucrat, county attorney, and reserve deputy sheriff, who ran before for city council, and his only platform was to increase the police presence around the bars in downtown. So Mr. Police State. So I'm kind of getting surrounded by the Republicans. He's probably going to be the first one to call me out for being a Muslim, you know, being a right-wing lunatic and all. I actually put out a press release on how he's a threat to our civil liberties and everything like that, which he is. So we really have the choice between the lesser of two evils, and I think what I can do at a local level is just get people used to the idea that you should have more than two choices, and you should look for the most principled choice and vote what your heart tells you to vote for. So then when they go into these other races in 2016, or even in this current climate, especially with California's top two system, I mean, we're screwed between, as Cindy Sheehan told me, Israel candidate A and Israel candidate B. Like we really don't have a choice. So I'm like pretty much one of the few independent candidates in California. There's one person who made the top two up in Los Angeles County for Congress. And that's pretty much it, really. There's a Green Party candidate running for city council in Vista, which is near Encinitas. But I actually get to give people a reason to vote in the election, because I'm not going to be voting for Jerry Brown or Neil Kashkari. I'm going to be leaving that part of my ballot blank. Maybe for Congress, I'll vote against the incumbent, Darrell Issa, and of course vote for the medical marijuana initiative. But I really do think from the bottom up, like just because it starts with the people, it starts with the people living in your local area. Independents running at a state and local level will help get people used to the idea, so that by the time 2016 rolls around, we'll really have a force of people who are like, with all the wars continuing and everything like that with President Obama, I am not going to get fooled again. I am going cold turkey on the two-party system and the corporate media and the Commission on Presidential Debates. And I think I think that awakening is already happening, whether or not there's a candidate running, and it's thanks to so many people, whether free and equal or especially new media or alternative media, whatever you want to call it, just really helping people to be educated, and that use of social media. And that's why I was so impressed with the way the anti-media article that kind of put my KOSI appearance out there. That's the power of social media, and because of, like that's where, and I got a lot of people from Encinitas to discover me that wouldn't otherwise be discovered, because they do follow these alternative media pages like the Anti-Media and MintPress News, and people are waking up to the equal of two evils that is the two-party system.
Absolutely. And Alec, I'm afraid we're running out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today. It's always a pleasure. You can find this podcast through our MintPress iTunes channel and on our website. But the conversation is far from over, as we'd like to hear from you, our readers and listeners, on the subject of reforming the system from a hyper-local level, including elections, militarization of the police, and protecting medical marijuana patients from the feds. Tweet at us using hashtag MintCasts and tell us what you think. You can also post on our Facebook page and our comments section on our pinned post featuring this podcast. Thank you so much for listening.